professor of mathematics here at Westminster College. Whether as a life coach or as a professor, one of her greatest joys is watching clients and students overcome doubts and personal hurdles and develop to become more self-assured, happier people. Please help me in giving a warm welcome to Janine.
Hello. I'm here to convince you that it's really worth living your life according to who you truly are and what you value. It's actually kind of hard to know what we are and what we value because there's so many influences on us that tell us who we're supposed to want to be, what we're supposed to like, what we're supposed to strive for. All those things people tell us, or the society tells us, media, friends. And so it's really hard sometimes to peel those things apart. But the problem is, if you live your life according to those outside influences, you're not living your own life. You're living somebody else's life, and everything will just be harder. You will be less successful, friendships are harder when you're pretending to be somebody you're not. Everything just doesn't come as easy. Not too long ago, I was at a crossroads in my life. I was newly divorced. My family all live in Switzerland, so there was nobody to tell me what to do. Well, okay, my daughter probably had pretty strong opinions, but she was 12, so I was not going to take her life advice into account. So here I was, I could do anything, and I had no clue. I knew that what I was doing was not particularly working. I wasn't very happy, but I didn't really know who I was. I believed a lot of things that I had been told, and it turns out some of those were just not right. Luckily for me, at that point, I started life coach training, and I had to do a whole bunch of exercises, including one that I will show you in a little bit. I call it a values exercise, where they made us really clarify what is important to us ourselves, each of the coaches, and what maybe we were just told was important. And I found out quite a few things, and working with a life coach and doing a lot of soul searching and a few changes in my life, now I feel like I'm actually living the life I don't want to say that I was meant to lead, because that sounds very strong, but a life that fits me, a life that is really natural to me. And I have to say, it's so much easier. It's like I'm no longer swimming against the river, I'm swimming with the river. And I'm doing things that I like, I'm doing things with my heart, everything. I show up better for the people around me. Everything's just easier, and I'm a lot happier. So my goal is to sort of give you a little bit of an idea of the process I went through to see if you maybe could be encouraged to go through that same kind of idea. So this is a list of values. You'll notice these are not moral values. These are just things that can resonate with you or maybe not. And this is a really short list. If you want to do this for real, I would say go and Google values, because there's lists with 200 words on them. But this will sort of be a good start. In a minute, I'm going to ask you to actually select a few of these values, 3 of them. And the idea is that you should select things that resonate with you. Selecting one does not mean that you don't like the others. It just means that maybe the ones you selected are the ones that are top on the line for you. And one word of warning, if you feel like you should select a value, it's probably not your value. It's probably a value that you were told you should have. And it doesn't mean it's a bad value. It just might mean that it's not your top value. The values that are really kind of right should feel more light, happy. They might even feel frivolous or way too much fun. So take a moment to just select 3 of them and maybe jot them down on your phone or your program or whatever. Okay, so now you have 3 values. Now comes the hard part. Think of your life. How well does that life fit those values that you chose? If you're like most people, it doesn't fit too well. And don't worry, I'm not going to tell you that you have to, abandon your family, give up your job, move to another state, and start anew. Instead, what you can do is make little changes that will slowly get you to where you are in alignment with those values. So, of course, there's some of you here who are probably undergraduates and are about to choose a major, or maybe you're going out into the job market soon, and you have the chance to really go out there and live your values right off the bat. It can be, as I said, hard to just figure out what they are. Westminster undergraduates get free life coaching this year, so if you're interested, do let me know. Yes, and sorry, that slide just confused me. Yes, but Westminster undergrads gets free life coaching, so that's something that, spread the word. Now, most of us are not at a big crossroads. We have families, jobs, we can't just leave. But you can still make changes, like, for example, say you work in a windowless office, and your value is actually nature. Well, you can do little things like maybe you bring in a potted plant. Maybe you decorate the walls with posters or have your screensaver be something beautiful. Maybe you can negotiate to work from remotely for 1 day a week and then be in a place that actually really speaks to you. Or maybe you're ambitious enough to try to get that promotion and get that corner office with all the windows. Good luck. But whatever it is, you can always take a few steps, and they actually add up to a lot. And in some sense, the journey is just as good as the final destination. Because if you know that you're going there, that already feels really good. So for me personally, one of my values was supporting others. And when I realized that at first, I was really mad. Because my whole life I felt I had been doing nothing else but supporting others. And, here I was reinventing my life, and that's what I was going to do again? So that's when I worked again with my life coach and realized that what I needed to do was set boundaries. And this is true for a lot of you, for a lot of us, I should say. Boundaries are things where you just communicate to others what you will do and what you won't, and you hold firm. And they're normally, most of us set our boundaries too far out if we set them at all. Yes, I will, meet you to chat with you on your problem, about your problem, but I won't do it on the weekend because I have something else to do. That kind of thing, where you just say how far you're willing to go, and it's something to protect yourself, so you're actually going to be better at helping others, but at the same time, you're preserving your own integrity, you're making yourself strong, and you're supporting others. One word of sort of warning, when you set boundaries, especially if you haven't done it before, you're going to feel guilty. It's just the way it is. Don't take the guilt as a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's just how it is, and you have to accept the guilt and set the boundary anyway. After a while, the guilt gets less, and it gets easier and easier to set boundaries, but those first few times, they feel kind of unpleasant. But it's worth it. It really is worth it, because you get a lot of your life back. Another one of my values is authenticity. And that was another one I struggled with a little bit, because I have imposter syndrome. And so imposter syndrome is when you feel that wherever you got to, you didn't really get to it out of your own merit. It's because somebody helped you, because you were lucky, just because you were in the right place at the right time, that kind of thing. And so you feel like if the others just figured out how little you know or how little you can do, you would be stripped of your privileges and exposed as the imposter that you feel you are. Imposter syndrome is actually fairly common. Show of hands, how many of you have ever felt that way? Yep, I think you know what I'm talking about then. Yes. Imposter syndrome, again, it's something that you can overcome. It doesn't go away necessarily, but you can learn that those feelings, those thoughts, they're not actually the truth. They're just your imposter syndrome speaking. And so you go and apply for that promotion or that, that raise, even though you kind of know inside, okay, I feel like I don't deserve this, but you let your brain talk and it says, yes, actually, look at all these accomplishments. I'm going for it. And again, it gets easier over time. So on the whole, in this journey, I did all these things, and now I really do feel like I'm living a much better life, a life that is attuned to me, attuned to my values. I'm not saying it's, every day is beautiful and sunny and I'm eating cake all the time, but still, it's way, way better than it was before. And I really, really strongly encourage you all to take a look at what is important to you and make those little or big changes to get there and have your life align with it. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Stephanie Toby, alumni board member and graduate of the classes of 1998 and 2000. I'm thrilled to introduce our next speaker, Walter Prado. Walter was born and raised in Sacramento, California, and after graduating high school, he moved to the Los Angeles area for college. He majored in math with the initial goal of teaching, but through a series of events, wound up discovering his passion to work with college students in a different capacity. He got his master's degree in higher education leadership, where a large part of his research revolved around historically marginalized students and creating safe spaces for them on college campuses, as well as unearthing tools to help first-generation students succeed in college. He moved to Salt Lake City in January to begin his current role as admissions counselor. Walter serves as a mentor for the Legacy Scholars Program. In his spare time, he enjoys writing, listening to true crime podcasts, and baking. Please join me in welcoming Walter Prado to the stage.
Hi everyone, my name is Walter Prado and I'm an admissions counselor here at Westminster, and I'm so excited to be talking about the model minority myth today. I was not expecting my photo to be up there. For those of you in the back who can't see me, that's what I look like. So I was born and raised in Elk Grove, California, a suburb located on the southern tip of Sacramento County. My parents immigrated to the United States from the Philippines in the mid to late 1980s and ultimately settled in Sacramento County with the rest of our relatives. Being raised by the immigrant generation, I've always had a strong connection and appreciation for my culture. Given the heavy ethnic diversity in Elk Grove, people of color making up over half of Elk Grove's population, culture shock was hardly ever something I experienced between interacting with my family and my classmates in school. I've also been fortunate enough to have not experienced any amount of overt racial prejudice, nor did any interactions with my peers at school have a profound negative impact on me, at least at the time. Going through school, both my older sister and I excelled in our academics. Throughout elementary and junior high school, she and I often held one of the top positions in our classes. Noticing her unparalleled academic prowess, my sister was given the opportunity to be promoted out of 6th grade early under the recommendation of her teachers at the time. She ultimately graduated at the top of her class upon completing middle school. Though I didn't have quite the same academic motivation my sister did, I still often held the top spots in my classes and followed in my sister's footsteps throughout high school and took any honors and AP class I feasibly could. In school, I vaguely remember the hardly encouraging, almost always accusatory whispers of my classmates, explaining away my good grades with the facts that I am Asian American. Hearing things like, "You don't need to study, you're Asian." At the time, though, the model minority stereotype wasn't something that was explained to me, nor did this stereotype faze me. If anything, I found it encouraging, finding comfort in knowing that I was meeting the socially constructed expectations of being Asian. Because I was succeeding in school, I was then considered to be a true Asian. I almost thrived on the fact that I was excelling in school. I was giving my parents something to brag about, and it felt good knowing that I was the student my classmates should aspire to be. I did not recognize this stereotype as a problem because I bought into it. When the time came to begin considering college and what major I should pursue, I felt like I had only two options, doctor or engineer. Two career paths that would perpetuate the image that, as an Asian American, I had somehow made it in society. I ultimately chose to pursue a degree in civil engineering at Cal Poly Pomona because even the model minority stereotype was not enough to persuade me to go through an outrageous amount of schooling to become a doctor. Thank you. As I entered college, I realized that the mindset of fulfilling a stereotype would prove to be incredibly damaging. The model minority stereotype would no longer be the standard I idolized and would instead turn into a toxic companion that made me feel an overwhelming weight of inadequacy. Having graduated from high school in the top 10% of my class with a GPA of above a 4.0, I was admitted into the honors program at Cal Poly Pomona. I got into my first choice university with the major that I wanted. I was thriving academically, and I found a small community filled with like-minded, ambitious, goal-oriented individuals. In my 17-year-old eyes, college was going to be a blast. I wasn't ready for the series of humbling events that would force me to confront the standard that I had been trying to live up to my entire academic life. I finished off my first quarter of my undergraduate career with a 3.25 grade point average. Now, to everyone else, this could be seen as an impressive and promising start to a rigorous engineering curriculum. Given my academic past, though, a 3.25 to me was far from acceptable, and I refused to accept it as anything more than that. Aside from my own expectations, a 3.25 was also just under the required minimum GPA needed to remain in the honors program, and I was thus put on academic probation from the program. I was teetering on the edge of failure, which sent me onto a trajectory of feeling the need to prove my worth to everyone, including to an entire race of people. After I finally graduated with my bachelor's degree in math, I made sure I took my time to finally figure out what it was I wanted to do in my career. Whatever it was, I knew I was done with math, I was done with engineering, or anything having to do with STEM. So I decided to go back to school and work towards a master's degree in a field where I could still work in education and with students, but outside of the classroom. In my graduate school program, I took a class on diversity in higher education, where I had the opportunity to learn about critical race theory, which would be the lens I defaulted to when I did any kind of research. When I began focusing my research on the Asian American experience and the model minority myth, I learned about an offshoot of CRT called Asian Crit that, you guessed it, specifically scrutinizes the Asian American experience, and I'm happy to share a little bit about that with you today. So there are 7 tenets within Asian Crit, and the tenet I will be focusing on today is Asianization, which criticizes the stereotyping of Asians as a monolithic group of people who achieve impenetrable academic and economic success. So what does a stereotypical Asian American look like according to the model minority myth? They are oftentimes seen as studious, serious, having submissive obedience and social introversion, in addition to being hardworking, adaptive, demure, shy, and possessing strong family values. All seemingly positive things, right? But despite the fact that many parents of Asian American children have a limited education background and work blue-collar jobs, their children graduate from college at around the same rate as their middle-class peers. Many people minimize this phenomenon as a direct consequence of being raised under Asian and Confucian values. However, this assumption can quickly be debunked by the fact that not all Asian American children achieve the same academic success. Those from Laotian, Cambodian, and Hmong families have different educational outcomes than those of Chinese or Japanese descent. What's ironic about these assumptions is the fact that social scientists are unable to offer any explanation behind Asian American success and are comfortable making these assumptions without even engaging with any of the cultures. Asian Americans are typically unjustly lumped into one homogeneous entity, paying no attention to the many different cultures that exist within Asian America, a phenomenon caused by the model minority myth in combination with the growing Asian population. So where did this stereotype even originate from? It was born out of the change in US immigration law in 1965 that ushered in a stream of highly educated Asian immigrants and would change the socioeconomic profiles of Asian Americans for generations to come. Coined in 1966 by William Peterson, note the non-Asian name, the term model minority was initially used to praise Asian Americans, Japanese Americans specifically, for establishing a remarkable record by their own almost totally unaided effort. Further quoting Peterson, every attempt to hamper Asian American progress resulted only in enhancing their determination to succeed. Though initially meant to be encouraging towards Asian Americans and other communities of color, the model minority myth has proven to be far more problematic and destructive than anything else. The model minority myth washes away the individual struggles of the different communities within Asian America, ultimately pitting Asian Americans against each other and their non-white counterparts. So let's revisit those stereotypes again. According to the model minority myth, an Asian American does well academically, gets the highest paying job, does really well for themselves. They are the model minority, what all other minorities should aspire to be. But what happens when an Asian American doesn't measure up to this stereotype? What if they don't rank the highest in their graduating class? What if they don't end up becoming an engineer or a doctor or a lawyer? After walking away from an engineering degree and almost failing out of my math degree, I couldn't tell you the amount of inadequacy I felt. The thought of failing out of school aside, having the added layer of feeling as if I'm letting an entire race of people down was even more soul-crushing. But on the other side of the coin, when an Asian American does succeed, they are oftentimes seen as too smart, untouchable, unapproachable, and that often puts them in the path of ridicule and isolation, and they become social pariahs. All right, let's talk about scandals. The college admissions scandal, that is, but not that one. There we go. So in August 2017, the Students for Fair Admissions, or the SFFA, blew the whistle on Harvard University about its admissions practices and alleged discriminatory practices against Asian American applicants. According to the SFFA, because Asian Americans typically place on the higher end of academic ability, Harvard is purposefully penalizing these students in the personal rating criteria in an attempt to avoid overpopulating their campus with Asian students. The allegations of Harvard discriminating against Asian American applicants have opened the floodgates of conversation surrounding the model minority myth. An analysis of the Harvard admissions process has found that applicants are scored based on two criteria: academic ability and likability. The SFFA asserts that the university holds their Asian American applicants to a higher academic standard and purposefully penalizes them on their likable scale, both traits that feed into the model minority stereotype, in an attempt to stabilize the Asian American population on campus. This accusation brought about conversations surrounding the model minority myth and how it impacts the lives of Asian American college students and college aspiring students. So which is worse? Not being smart enough and not being considered Asian enough, or exceeding academic standards to the point of being the subject of ridicule and discrimination? We can't win on either side. Samuel Musaeus and Peter Kang deconstruct the model minority myth and acknowledge the inconsistency between this standard and the notion that Asian Americans are often invisible in the higher education space. According to them, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are often excluded from the higher education scholarly inquiry, in part due to the pervasive influence of the model minority myth on contemporary thought. Because the Asian American population is smaller compared to the Latinx or African American population, Asian American issues are often overlooked or not given as much consideration as other ethnic minority groups. In a 2002 article in which Bob Suzuki analyzes the higher education implications of the model minority stereotype, he says, because Asian American students are stereotyped as problem-free high achievers, institutions of higher education have tended to neglect the many serious problems and needs that they have. For decades, the demure and yellow perils stereotype of Asian Americans has been perpetuated because of a lack of knowledge of Asian America and the ignorance to the dozens of different cultures within that community of people. In addition to this lack of knowledge, there is also a tendency to shove Asian Americans out of sight and to ignore the problems and challenges that they face. By limiting access to higher education and discriminating against Asian American students, any potential progress to eliminate the model minority myth is thrown away. Just as it is unfair to homogenize all people of color into one other category, Asian Americans also cannot be lumped into one category, and it cannot be assumed that each person from distinct cultures can be served in the same way. A more race-targeted means to admissions, retention, and education overall needs to be conceptualized and implemented in order to see true progress in the higher education sphere. Just as African Americans and Latinx students require different services, the same goes for Laotians and Japanese, Chinese and Vietnamese, Indians and Filipinos. Up until very recently, I viewed my experience in school as a relatively normal one, which it was, with very few, if any, events that would open my eyes to oppression or privilege. Upon reflection, I realized that the model minority myth dictated a larger part of my entire academic experience than I thought. My experience as an Asian American student is a true testament to the treachery of the model minority myth. This unfounded stereotype has the potential to negatively impact someone's quality of living, self-worth, and overall well-being. Being in a career where I get to learn how to interact with different types of students and being able to pull from my own experiences brings my experiences around full circle. One major thing I have learned is that I am not alone in my experiences, and now knowing this, I can let future students know that they are not alone either. The opportunity to be in a position where I get to empower students by diminishing stereotypes like the model minority myth will be the bow I get to tie around my own experiences as a hostage of the stereotype. With the ever-evolving demographics of the higher education space, it is time to put these stereotypes to rest and help students recognize their true potential, unshackled by years of misinformation and assumptions. Thank you.
I'd like to welcome to the stage our next speaker, Wendy Gillihan. Wendy is an alum who received her BBA and MACC degrees from Westminster College. She started her own consulting business in 2009 while completing her undergraduate degree, providing management consulting with a focus on compliance and technological efficiency for startup companies across industries, nonprofits, and healthcare organizations through small periods of change. She has served as a volunteer instructor at the Small Business Administration, as the chair of the Seattle Women's Commission and Labor Standards Advisory Commission, on the Board of Trustees and Policy Leadership Group for the Seattle Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce, and on the Washington Department of Revenue Business Advisory Council. Please give a warm welcome to Wendy Gillihan.
Good evening. When you hear hoofbeats, think of horses, not zebras. This maxim is attributed to Dr. Theodore Woodard, while a professor at the School of Medicine in the University of Maryland in the 1940s. A news story caught my attention this past August about a group of escaped zebras in Maryland about 20 miles outside of Washington, D.C. People living in the area spotted zebras in their backyards and while driving around their neighborhoods. I really wonder what Dr. Woodward would think of that story. If presented with evidence that you actually do see a zebra, it's very human to revert back and assume that you're wrong, that what you're seeing is a horse. Our brain readily accepts what is common, what is expected, over what is rare. In my late childhood, I started hearing doctors say some variation of this zebra maxim. Essentially that looking for anything outside of the common causes of symptoms
was not a great way to diagnose a patient. I noticed over time that doctors very often would start a visit with a conclusion, would start a visit with what they thought was causing symptoms, and then work backwards from there, really narrowing down and ignoring things that would possibly lead them to a different conclusion. This behavior is actually why people with rare conditions are referred to as zebras. I did a quick look to find examples, and they're on the bottom of my slide here. I just put up 3 of ones I thought were amusing, of foundations and societies for people with rare conditions, and found that the National Institute of Health, being inspired by this, now has a search tool for doctors called findzebra.com to help them diagnose. My experience as a zebra began in high school, many, many years before this was a trend in the medical community. I started experiencing low blood pressure. The lowest recorded was 50/30. And for context, normal is normally no lower than around 90/60. Blood pressure that low results in difficulty concentrating, fatigue, and sometimes syncope, which I learned that word when I was about 14. It's a fancy medical term for fainting. My fainting episodes while at my first job led my parents to take me to the doctor. The doctor just ignored the fact that my blood pressure was so low. And there were other things that he also ignored. He just focused on the fact that I was having fatigue and having difficulty keeping up with my activities, my sports, my schoolwork. And so he diagnosed me with major depression. And he said at the start of the visit that so many of his patients my age had that. So that was his assumption when I came in. And he ignored everything that did not support that conclusion. And just never addressed the fact that I had these other things happening, or that my symptoms did not actually fit his actual diagnosis. I wonder now how many people have suffered in this way, needlessly because of doctors like him. I know I did for many, many years. I had to wait more than 2 decades for an accurate diagnosis and treatment for something called postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, which is usually shortened to POTS because that's quite a mouthful. This condition is the result of a malfunction of the autonomic nervous system. This controls things like heart rate and blood pressure and temperature control, nothing important. So when you stand, your body does amazing things to adapt to that, and mine sometimes does not. So every time I stand up, I have to pause, am I going to just fall back down? And you get very used to falling in a way that looks intentional. POTS is diagnosed with a very straightforward test. You either have the syndrome or you do not. The test was simply never ordered. And once it was, and thanks to my incredible neurologist, I felt better than I had since childhood. My symptoms are severe, and they require a lot of maintenance. But with effort and medical support, I've seen a dramatic improvement in my quality of life. And for some perspective, between 1 and 3 million Americans have POTS. Between 17 and 18 million Americans have major depression, according to the National Institute of Health. This experience, this pattern, repeated itself for all 5 of my rare medical conditions. It wasn't until after I completed my degrees here at Westminster that I understood how to navigate the situation. I was the second person ever to complete the BBA program within the business school here. I then took my capstone project, and I actually really ran with my consulting business called Griffin Consulting. And I then came back a few years after that and completed my master's degree in accountancy. I've completed certifications in my field, including as a fraud examiner, and have conducted many investigations in my professional life. In the accounting program, we learned how to refine this really wonderful thing called professional skepticism. To have a questioning mind, to critically analyze evidence, always being alert to any information or behavior that indicates a misstatement, either intentional or careless in nature. Professional skepticism became very useful in challenging these doctor assertions that did not match up to the evidence. I was suffering from a broad range of disabling symptoms that impacted nearly every system in my body. And I hid these struggles well most of the time, or at least I think I did, but focusing on a significant part of hiding a significant part of myself was incredibly isolating. After attending Westminster, I had some additional skills to really challenge this pattern of misdiagnosis. There is an incredible strength in knowing it's okay to ask well-reasoned questions if something just doesn't make sense. The accountancy program required students to stand in front of the class and present on topics, and the professor in the class would challenge on anything that was said that was unsubstantiated. You know, those assertions had to be well-reasoned and well-researched. And we learned to anticipate those questions and to research concepts on unfamiliar topics. Most importantly, though, we learned the limits of our knowledge and the integrity of saying those amazing words, "I don't know." This skill became vital when advocating for myself in a medical context with doctors who held beliefs that were incorrect. Tests confirmed each time that I did not have the syndromes or diseases that didn't make any sense given my symptoms. For example, I spent years having doctors search for evidence to prove that I had MS, which sounds scary, except that I never believed I had it. And over time, after more than a decade, I was proven correct. It's interesting that POTS is as prevalent as MS, according to the NIH, but it's not something most doctors, or even all neurologists, learn about in their medical training. Interacting with experts and convincing them to consider an alternate viewpoint was part of my education and is a daily part of my professional life. I've used this skill to present and respectfully present complete and relevant information when advocating for medical care. One of my favorite classes in my accountancy program was our required course in communication. The communication course, and most of my other classes as well, required work in teams where I depended on others to complete a project. While this can be a frustrating prospect, I learned how to navigate a variety of perspectives and then move towards a shared goal. Working in teams with a high level of interpersonal ability is an integral part of any profession. This depends on a degree of emotional intelligence that is not always associated with accountants. I think that's why they really leaned into that here, which I really appreciated. This helped me manage my medical conditions with tenacity and resilience and confidence. Improving my communication skills with a humble heart has also helped me in so many other ways. Some of the disabling symptoms have reversed entirely with proper treatment. Most are things that I can work with now that I know what's happening and how to adapt. And I'm able to advocate for myself and others and no longer feel isolated by my circumstances. Thanks to my Westminster education, I identify diagnoses reached without appropriate evidence using professional skepticism. I stay humble about what I do not know, but also always passionate about defending my assertions through well-researched and reasoned ideas. And I enjoy working with others, especially when they can bring a new perspective. So I did some research and found many examples of zebras in urban areas and near urban areas across Western Europe, across the US. Who knew that this was a phenomenon? These photos are pulled from actual news sites. I just thought that was incredible because this really demonstrates this simple concept in accounting, medicine, and many professions. And to paraphrase Sherlock Holmes, once we clear out all the distractions, we can focus on what remains. Sometimes what is left is easy to believe, other times it can seem highly improbable. However, with the impossible eliminated, what remains are the only possible solutions, and one of them must be the truth. And sometimes the truth is, there are zebras, like me. Thank you.
Please join me in welcoming our next speaker, Joe Richardson. Originally from upstate New York, Joe moved to Salt Lake City as a junior in high school. He joined the Army National Guard and was accepted a slot into the early commissioning program, where he then moved to Valley Forge Military Academy and College outside of Philadelphia and attended Army schools such as Army Airborne School and Cadet Advancement Camp. Joe earned his associate's degree in liberal arts and humanities and then moved back to Utah, where he has been working on his bachelor's degree in a custom major of recreational and environmental leadership here at Westminster, while also serving on the Joint Forces HQ for the state of Utah. His passions include kayaking, canoeing, climbing, backpacking, camping, and learning as many outdoor skills as he can. And after college, he wants to work with youth in the outdoor education field. Please welcome Joe Richardson to the stage.
Hello, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Awesome. Well, I'm going to start out first thing right off the bat with saying thank you, everyone, for coming, especially with my supporters, my family, my advisors, everyone that's really helped me get to this point and get me on the stage to be able to talk tonight. Thank you. I really appreciate everything. I'm going to start first things first with asking the audience, how can you personally, either directly or indirectly, change the life of somebody? That can be anyone, a youth, a peer, a family member, somebody that you don't know at all. But think about that. That's going to be a big premise of my talk today is, throughout this, how can you either indirectly or directly impact somebody's life? So the activity I'm going to kind of do next with you guys is everyone can kind of close your eyes for me, I'm going to explain to you the place that inspired me to want to be an outdoor educator and the place that really changed my life to be where I am today. So you go ahead and close your eyes. Imagine, so let me set the scene a little bit. So we're in upstate New York on a large lake. It's about a mile long. You can see in all different directions. You're sitting in a canoe in the middle of the lake. The water is just glossy. There's not a ripple anywhere to be seen. It's quiet. The only thing that you can hear behind you is the faint sound of children laughing and playing at the summer camp that's right directly behind you. The sun is up in the middle of the sky. It's super warm. The sun's just beating down on your face. You can feel it in your face and shoulders. It's middle of summer, so it's really nice and warm. As you're paddling along, you just have one paddle. As you switch sides over your body, the water drips onto you, and you kind of get that nice, refreshed feeling coming from the droplets of the water. And as you're paddling, you're coming up on almost this cave-like looking area where the pine branches are hanging right over the water. And it almost looks like that of like a mystic cave. All you can smell is like just overwhelming pine, like being in like a Yankee Candle store, like walking past the pine section. And as you're paddling along, the sun kind of goes down. You're in this nice, cool shade. All you smell is pine. And you open back up, and it's almost like you just went through a tunnel. And you're in this just amazing place, fully by yourself. And there's nothing but you, the water, and just nature in general. This is my story. This is my place. And I'm going to kind of explain to you the person at this camp that changed my life so indirectly that 8 years later, I don't even know his last name, but I know that the reason I'm in my major right now is because he had the faith and the inspiration in me as an 8-year-old boy to give me the ability to teach boating classes, be on the water, and do these different activities. So, like I was saying, I started going to this 4-H camp when I was about 8 years old. It was amazing. I totally loved it. I grew up on a river, and I grew up on different lakes, so I was always around boating, but it was a lot of the time more like jet boats and different things like that. So this first year I was introduced to canoeing, kayaking, paddleboarding, and I just loved it so much. And the person that was in charge at the time, his name was James. He was actually a student at Colorado State University, and he would fly to upstate New York every year to be a camp director at this, or aquatic director at this camp. Where he saw that just the light up in my face when I was on the water and having such a good time starting at 8 years old, he allowed me every single year to be more and more involved in teaching. He'd allow me to be able to give the paddle and teach the students how to paddle one year, and to the point of my last year being, I was fully in charge of the boating curriculum for over half the summer. So 3 weeks of the summer as a 15-year-old boy, I had full range, and he had the faith in me and the ability to see how much passion I had for this as a youth to inspire me to be a peer tutor, a peer leader, and allowed me to find my passions. 8 years down the road, here I am wanting to work as a youth educator to give those same things, those same opportunities to kids that I had from this student from Colorado State University. Okay, so next I'm going to jump on to, I want to bring up this author. His name is Richard Louv. He writes a book called The Last Child in the Woods. And he brings up some really interesting points when it comes to youth education, when it comes to the outdoor field. And I'm going to bring up 3 of his points that hopefully, as people in this crowd, people watching, can take in to relating to that question I asked at the beginning, how you can inspire youth to do this. So number 1 is time in nature teaches respect for kids. When kids are young and they're taught the proper ways of enjoying land and respecting nature and really understanding that, like, leave no trace is an important aspect for kids to understand later down the road as adults, when they're now in charge and they're now helping teach other people how important it is to not litter. And it allows for the beginning and the start of more conservationists, more environmentalists to come through and really make a big difference when it comes to either studying environmental, loving nature, and being whatever specialty you want, going forward and looking into climate change and looking into all these important things that our generations need going further. It's very, very important that we do that. The second thing that Richard Love talks about is we all need time in the outdoors. It doesn't matter if you're a baby, a little kid, middle-aged, or old. Nature can be therapeutic. It can be something that's healthy. It can be whatever that you want to use. I do acknowledge that there is things about nature. Later in my speech, I'm going to talk about some barriers that the outdoor has, but it can be used in the appropriate way to be a great tool for not only inspiring youth, but using it yourself and continuing to make this planet and ourselves better. The third one talks about outdoor educators, and I'm not just talking about like science teachers or professors or academia in general. All of us are academic and outdoor leaders. No matter what your background is, you can teach and you can enjoy the outdoors, which makes us all outdoor leaders. But what this talks about is being able to inspire kids through what we call in the outdoor education is place-responsive teaching. And what I mean by this, and what Richard Love means by this, is the fact of inspiring kids and teaching kids about local, flora and flora, so plants, shrubs, animals, giving kids and teaching kids a set place in which they can feel proud. They know what type of plants grow there. They know and can really enjoy and have passion in the place they live. Place-responsive teaching goes past that a little bit more. So using that unconventional way of teaching plants and animals and really making it real life for the students, it's also important to make these students or let the students understand that there's so much more to place than just that. There's historical, there's spiritual, there's ecological, there's all these other factors to place that a lot of the times people don't know. That it's really important to use these non-traditional ways of teaching to really inspire these kids to be aware of where they are, aware of what I'm going to move in next, of the barriers within the outdoors, and how we, as a community, can move past it. Which kind of brings me right into the next part. There are a lot of barriers within the outdoor field. I think it would be a big waste or a disadvantage to you guys if I didn't bring them up tonight. Some of the barriers within the outdoor field are apparent, and I know as outdoor educators, there's a lot of movement towards trying to make it more equitable for everyone, but it doesn't always happen. So I'm going to highlight some of them so that we can, as a group, know and acknowledge this and make plans on moving forward. The first one is financial. If any of you guys have gone out and tried to do a lot of outdoor stuff, it is expensive. If you want to go out and rock climb, but you don't have stuff to rock climb, it's really dangerous. If you want to go kayak, but you don't have a kayak, it might be kind of hard depending on where you're going. I'm just joking. A lot of these things are really hard, and not everyone has the money, has the abilities to go out and buy all these things. So making the fact of going out and having or being able, if you have the gear, to let people come do it and inspire other people to come in and use those resources that you have and really teach and do it in a safe way, that's huge, because a lot of people may not be fully financially able to go in and just do all these expensive sports in the outdoors. And the outdoors shouldn't be for the people that can afford it. The outdoors should be anyone that wants it, not who can afford it. So that's something that is just food for thought. It is expensive, so we could think for moving past that. Number 2, locational. We are in one of the probably best places ever in the state of Utah, because you have 5 national parks within 5 hours. You have all this beautiful southern Utah land, and then you go 5-6 hours up north. You have the Tetons, you have Yellowstone. We're in the best spot you could possibly imagine when it comes to locational. But understanding and realizing that not everyone is. Some people's green spaces might be a city park in the middle of an urban area, or maybe for some people, maybe I'm growing a plant in my science class, and that's the only green that I get. Understanding that not every single person has the resources to fully go out and really take advantage of the outdoors is something that needs to be understood. Not everyone's going to have the same experiences when it comes to thinking about your special place and where, if you were to be up here and explain someplace to the whole crowd, how you could get somebody else to experience that. Third is time. Not everyone has time to fully go out and experience all these fun outdoor activities. There's 100 million things usually pulling us in all different directions, from family, from work, school, animals. There's 100 million things that are pulling us all over the place. So sometimes just getting out and experiencing nature is a barrier within itself. Like it kind of compiles with some of the other ones. Sometimes you don't have enough time because you're working to get money so that you could pay for the kayak that you tried to go out with before that you didn't have. So it's kind of like those compiling things that just allow for more barriers within the outdoor community. And the last one, and one that I think is the most important, and if you can take anything from this when it comes to outdoor education and inspiring other people when it comes to the outdoors, is the barrier of making people feel safe and as if they belong in nature. With a lot of the historical things in our country, with a lot of spiritual, ecological, there's a lot of things that might compile to make people not feel fully like they belong in nature. And if we can tackle that one and make that the forefront of thinking, what is my place? So my place is the upstate New York. How can I make anyone feel as if they could come there and feel like it is a safe place for them and that they belong there? How can we move forward and not only helping with financials and helping with making time and helping with all these other barriers, above all, how can we make people feel as if they belong there? We want them there. We, like, as outdoor educators, you want people to be in your special place. Like, that's important to you, and you want to share that with others. But if you try to share it with somebody when they don't feel comfortable or they don't feel safe, you are actually going to end up doing more harm for that person than you are actually going to be doing good. Trying to force activities onto people that don't feel safe, don't feel like they belong in that area, is going to do absolutely no good. So that's the biggest thing, making people feel safe and as if they belong, and being understanding with that place responsive learning that I talked about earlier, of what land are you on? What ancestral land are you on? What happened on the land that you're at? How could that make people feel uncomfortable? How could that make somebody feel not safe within the land that you're on? And acknowledging that as a leader and being able to break down those barriers and allow for that spot to be a safe spot for anyone. Going to take kind of a turn now, since that was a little bit dark. I'm going to talk about some programs that are doing really good with these types of things and really tackling these barriers within the United States. The first one I want to talk about is the Every Kid's Outdoor program. This is a federal program right now that allows for every fourth grade student in the United States to get a national park pass. And understanding some of those barriers, it may be hard for some students to really go out to national parks. It may be hard to do some of those things, but with the time of school and other federal programs of working on getting students to the actual national parks, the federal government is trying to work on getting those students out there and making those students fall in love with nature at a young age, just like we kind of talked about, to allow for more people to have a deeper love and understanding of nature, starting at that young age, just kind of like Richard Love said in his book. The second one is actually, most of you guys probably know about them, is the YMCA. The YMCA is doing an amazing job in the last couple of years on making camps and summer programs and after-school programs and all these programs for diverse communities, diverse groups, making sure that it's finding scholarships for people that may not have the resources to go to these camps, and really trying to go above and beyond to not only make these people feel like they belong, make everyone feel as if they can belong in a set place, but encourage people and it allowed for a diverse and fun outdoor experience, especially in our youth. So if you have people in your life that are younger, kids, family friends, nieces, nephews, definitely look into that. Like summer camp experiences and those experiences at a young age can be some of the most impactful times in their entire life when it comes to growth themselves, meeting diverse people, and really self-growth when it comes to being young. So, next I kind of want you guys to think back to either my place or your own place, preferably your own place that you think of when you close your eyes. When you think, what is my one place that I absolutely love? That if I had to get on stage, I would explain that place to other people. Think back to that place, and how can you, leaving this auditorium, and help somebody experience your place? How can you go out later after hearing this talk and inspire the youth to want to be in love with nature and love and use and be in the same mindset that you are about your place? And lastly, how can you change a life in general? Thank you.
I'm so excited to welcome our final speaker of the night, Dr. Bonnie Baxter, presenting an obituary for Great Salt Lake. Dr. Baxter is a professor of biology here at Westminster College. She has spent 2 decades studying microbial life in the extreme environment of Great Salt Lake. She founded and directs the Great Salt Lake Institute to facilitate research on the lake and provides outreach opportunities for science education. Please welcome Dr. Bonnie Baxter to the stage.
Great Salt Lake experienced her final glimmering sunset today, succumbing to a long struggle with chronic diversions exacerbated by climate change. She was born 13,000 years ago to Lake Bonneville, who occupied the basin previously, and the Holocene epoch, who melted ice and evaporated water. Her dusty remains will be scattered across the Salt Lake Valley for millennia, and we will be constantly reminded of her passing by our air quality monitors. She was preceded in death by her cousin, Owens Lake, who lived in California. She is survived by Mono Lake, whose family took legal action using the public trust doctrine to revive her when she was on life support. During her life, Great Salt Lake underwent many surgeries and amputations. She suffered blockages in her circulatory system, most significantly a transverse incision of a rail causeway, which restricted the flow of her fluids. Although it was common for her to expand and shrink her girth, the last 50 years of her life were especially tumultuous in this regard. When she was at her largest in the 1980s, the state of Utah insisted that she diet with intervention to protect her human neighbors from flooding. Ultimately, the thirst of a rapidly growing population upstream, which prevented her from refilling, caused a severe reduction in her size. As water was withheld, she began wasting away. Projects such as the Inland Port, Bear River development, relocating the state prison, and construction of a non-essential landfill put much strain on her. In her frail state, she was exposed to the planet's warming temperatures and local drought conditions. The combination of terminal dehydration and high fever caused her eventual demise.
Great Salt Lake had a very salty personality and was known to her neighbors as salty and buggy. She had the best memory, holding on to every mineral, pollutant, and sediment that she ever encountered. Noted for hosting many around her table, she fed anyone who migrated by. Visitors could count on being accosted by her pet biting gnats in the spring, but would always leave her home with the most unique treasures. She loved people, especially those native inhabitants of the basin who built caves and traded salt, but also those humans who built funky buildings and partied on her beaches. A nonconformist, Great Salt Lake was infamous for wearing a palette of intriguing colors, not the usual blue of other lakes. Her wardrobe was steeped in pink lemonade and photosynthetic green and sandy taupe. Her salty shorelines were ruffled and rugged. It was her northern red waters and ethereal characteristics that drew artist Robert Smithson to Utah to embellish her with his spiral jetty. She demonstrated her care and concern for people by floating them gently in her arms and never allowing them to sink. However, when disturbed, her short temper could quickly whip the heavy waters into frothy waves that could capsize a boat and would leave foam blanketing the shoreline. Although not a skier herself, Great Salt Lake was an avid donor to the ski industry, contributing her lake effect to the greatest snow on earth. During the summer months, she enjoyed paddleboarding, canoeing, and sailing. She combined her love of chemistry and aesthetics to create many rusted pieces of art. She served as a model for many artists over the years who echoed her uncommon beauty in their work. She was a committed volunteer for her local environment, spending her time absorbing heavy metals and balancing nutrients. Always an avid bird watcher, Great Salt Lake earned a PhD in ornithology, observing 338 species over thousands of years. She was an entrepreneur, supporting an array of businesses, from brine shrimp harvesting to salt extraction. As a hobbyist, she collected old boats, wooden railroad trestles, and an occasional airplane. Great Salt Lake was an award-winning ecosystem. In fact, she was lauded as a site of hemispheric importance for birds. For centuries, she hosted one of the largest breeding colonies of white pelicans in the world. For decades, she hosted the annual Great Salt Lake Bird Festival, the Great Salt Lake Open Swim, and Antelope Island Spider Festival. She was a noted activist for diversity, understanding that life of all sorts has equal value in the world. Once, standing in protest, she challenged the Utah Department of Environmental Quality to develop water quality standards made difficult by her high salt content, leading to equity for salt lakes everywhere. For this work and for her inclusion of Native people in her history, she is often referred to as Notorious GSL. There was action to prevent the death of Great Salt Lake, but it was too little, too late. In 2019, as she was gasping her dying breath, she influenced the Utah House to pass a concurrent resolution, HCR 10, which would acknowledge her condition of desiccation. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the legislature of the state of Utah, the governor concurring therein, recognize the critical importance of ensuring adequate water flows to Great Salt Lake and its wetlands to maintain a healthy and sustainable lake system. While this recognized a need for policy and engagement by stakeholders, the resolution did not fund any specific remedies. She supported Utah's economy for many years, but we did not adequately fund her health care in time. Had we done so, we might not be mourning her death today. Utah regrets the loss of this unique piece of its identity, as does the lake's namesake, Salt Lake City. The state is still struggling with 7,706 employment casualties when the brine shrimp and salt extraction industries literally dried up. Also, 1 million tourists no longer visit Utah since the closure of the state and federal lands surrounding Great Salt Lake. With her death, Utahns now pay more for their water treatment, and the ski season is limited to just a few weeks. People are also suffering additional health costs from dust exposure and a spiritual loss of this cultural hub. She will be missed by the 85,000 American white pelicans who nested and fed around the lake, and the 5 million eared grebes that fed on the abundant brine shrimp in her salty waters, and their 10 million avian colleagues who love Great Salt Lake for millennia. The greatest loss is the opportunity for folks to connect, find common ground, and work together to save her. Her friends and family would like to express thanks to the many people who pled for action on behalf of Great Salt Lake. Our gratitude is extended to the state agencies, the community members, advocacy groups, and the many research scientists and students who strive to understand her and who spread the word about her importance. In lieu of flowers, conserve water and call your legislators to advocate for smart water laws. In keeping with her salty personality, she requested that admirers play the song, "Another One Bites the Dust," at her memorial.
Good evening. I'm Heather Stringfellow, and I'm the Director of Alumni Relations here at Westminster, and I have the great job of wrapping us up this evening. I'd like to start with a big thank you to our big thinking presenters. Please join me in offering up another round of appreciation. I'd also like to thank my team for making this happen. Cheyenne Gray, I think she's up in the back of the house, I hear it's called, and Maggie Regier, who's in the back. I hit the jackpot by recruiting 2 Westminster Theater alums on my team, let me just say. And I'd like to thank all of you for joining me this evening. It feels incredible to be in person with all of you and all the folks at home, I think. The camera's over there, joining us via our YouTube channel. I'm sorry to say, however, the folks at home, that we haven't figured out an economical way to pipe refreshments to you. So unfortunately, you won't be, only the folks here tonight can join me. But I'd like to invite you up to Richer Alcove for some desserts and to continue the conversation we've started tonight. And a big thank you to our in-kind event sponsors this evening, our neighbors at Tea Zaanti Cafe and the Dodo. So thank you again, and good night to the folks at home, and I'll see you upstairs.